The sun had barely risen over the rugged Afghan mountains when the soldiers of Forward Operating Base Kestrel started their morning routines. Dust swirled across the concrete paths, clinging to boots and uniforms, and the smell of diesel mixed with the faint tang of sweat. Inside the armory, amid the low hum of fluorescent lights, one figure moved in silence. She was a woman, her hair tucked neatly under a cap, sleeves rolled up, sleeves exposing lean, toned arms. Her hands worked methodically over a series of rifles, oiling, wiping, checking for any signs of wear or imperfection. Each movement was precise, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The men watching her from across the room snickered. Private nudged Corporal, "Look at her, cleaning rifles again. You think she even knows how to shoot?" Shrugged, smirking, "Probably not. Someone should tell her this isn't home economics class." The laughter was quiet at first, meant to avoid the scrutiny of the senior staff, but it grew bolder. Another soldier, laughing too loudly, added, "I bet she's just here to polish brass. Leave the real work to us." They didn't notice her glance toward them, sharp, cool, and unblinking. Her eyes, a piercing shade of gray, held a weight that unsettled those who met them. It wasn't hostility, it was awareness. Awareness of their doubts, their ignorance, and more importantly, their underestimation. They laughed at a shadow they did not yet understand. Despite the mockery, she continued her work. Her fingers glided over the rifles with the ease of someone who had handled them 1,000 times, who had counted every round, memorized every mechanism, who could assemble and disassemble them blindfolded. Her hands moved in silent perfection, cleaning and inspecting each weapon with the care of a craftsman. She never flinched, never looked up, never acknowledged the laughter. Lieutenant, a young officer in charge of logistics, entered the armory with a clipboard in hand. He paused, observing the scene quietly, unsure whether to intervene. His gaze lingered on the woman for a moment longer than necessary. Something about her presence did not fit the narrative he had been told about the base's personnel. There was a calmness about her, not nervousness, not hesitation, but a steady, quiet focus that drew attention without effort. "She's new here," muttered to himself, nodding her posture and the rhythm of her work. "But there's something off about her, too precise, too calm." Outside the armory, the chatter of soldiers continued. Jokes flew about her supposed ineptitude in combat. Some speculated she was an administrative trainee. Others whispered she might have faked her assignment to avoid real duties. They had no idea. Meanwhile, she moved from rifle to rifle, each one a reflection of her patience and discipline. She inspected the barrels for microabrasions, the stocks for splinters or imperfections, the triggers for resistance and smoothness. She cleaned the bolts meticulously, checked the gas systems, the firing pins, the sights. It was not just maintenance, it was preparation. And though none of the men could comprehend it yet, they were in the presence of someone who treated weapons not as tools, but as extensions of her own body, extensions of a skill honed in life-or-death situations. A group of privates approached, smirking. "Hey," one called out, "why don't you show us how you actually shoot? Bet you couldn't hit a target if your life depended on it." She paused, turning slowly. Her face betrayed nothing, no amusement, no anger. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she laid a rifle on the bench, lifted it carefully, and scanned the room with the precision of a predator sizing up prey. The men laughed again, a nervous, half-hearted chuckle. "What? You scared, ghost?" one of them joked, using the nickname a rumor mill had assigned her after a shadowy incident during transport. Her hand never wavered. She loaded the rifle, chambered a round, and set up a small target at the far end of the armory, a sheet of metal with bullet markings from previous drills. Her movements were deliberate but impossibly fast, fluid, and confident. She adjusted her stance, aligning her eye with the sight. Her breathing was steady. Then she fired. The first shot hit the exact center of the target, dead center. The men froze. The second shot followed, then the third. 8 shots in total, all in perfect succession, all striking the bullseye without hesitation or tremor. The laughter stopped. The air felt thick, charged with disbelief. Private muttered under his breath, "No way, that's impossible." The general, who had arrived quietly to inspect the armory, leaned against the doorframe, watching silently. His experienced eyes caught every detail: the stance, the controlled exhalation, the absolute precision. This wasn't someone trained on the base. This was someone trained in a league of her own, someone whose skill had likely been forged in situations the average soldier could only imagine. Lieutenant finally stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "are you part of a special operations unit?" She didn't answer immediately. She placed the rifle down, wiped her hands on a rag with the same meticulous care she had shown throughout the morning, and finally met his gaze. "I'm here for observation," she said calmly, "to ensure the base's readiness, nothing more." The general's frown deepened. Something about her tone, her composure, and her actions set off alarms in his mind. The quiet, meticulous woman in front of him wasn't merely a soldier performing a routine task. She was a professional operating under the guise of ordinary routine, a ghost in plain sight. The soldiers whispered among themselves, uneasy now. The confidence they had once worn as a shield was cracking. The woman they had mocked was no mere trainee. Something about her presence demanded respect, even fear. And yet, she continued her work with unbroken calm, as if nothing had happened, as if the men's laughter had never existed. Glanced at the general, who remained silent, eyes following every movement. The general understood instinctively. This woman was not just a soldier. She carried a history, a reputation, a lethality that had been carefully hidden behind the guise of a quiet armorer. He had heard rumors of her, whispered among special forces, but never imagined he would see her here at this base, under his command. Outside, the base hummed with activity, oblivious to the storm of skill quietly unfolding inside the armory. And the soldiers, once confident and mocking, now felt the unsettling weight of her presence. She was a shadow, a myth, a storm waiting to strike. No one dared speak again. She continued her work. And she waited. The morning after the rifle demonstration, whispers spread through forward operating base Kestrel like wildfire. Soldiers crowded near the armory, their voices hushed yet excited, exchanging wild guesses about the quiet woman who had left every shot dead center of the target. She's probably some special forces instructor sent undercover," muttered one corporal, nudging a private. "I mean, who else could do that?" "Undercover, she barely speaks," the private laughed nervously, rubbing his neck. "She can't even follow the usual chains of command properly. How could she be?" The conversation halted abruptly when Private, flushed with excitement, leaned forward and whispered. "I saw her dog tag yesterday," it said. "SEAL Team 6, Ghost Lead." The words hung in the air, impossible yet terrifying. A silence fell over the small group. Ghost Lead, the legend whispered in hushed tones among Navy SEALs, was said to be untouchable, untraceable, and devastatingly effective. She was a ghost that appeared only in the most dangerous, top-secret operations. "Are you serious?" one soldier asked, his tone incredulous. "That's a myth that doesn't even exist. It's not real. Nobody survives as Ghost Lead and comes back." "I saw it myself," insisted, eyes wide. "Right there on her tag." Rumors circulated fast. Soldiers exchanged nervous glances, trying to convince themselves it was a mistake. Maybe it was a nickname. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe the armory clerk printed the wrong tag, but the unease lingered. Meanwhile, she moved through her routine as if the whispers didn't exist. Her focus never faltered. Each rifle she handled received the same precise attention, each trigger mechanism cleaned and tested as though the weapons were alive, extensions of her own hands. She never laughed, never responded to questions, never allowed herself to be seen as anything but professional. But the whispers grew louder. By midday, even the senior officers had heard them. Lieutenant found himself packing the armory floor, glancing at the woman as she carefully disassembled a rifle bolt. Every motion was fluid, almost ritualistic. Her hands were steady, almost unnaturally calm. She didn't glance at the men gathered, but he could sense her awareness of their scrutiny. The general called from the doorway, "Do you know who she really is?" Hesitated. "Sir, I think so, but it seems impossible. Her dog tag," he trailed off, glancing at her again. She was still working, still silent, still terrifyingly calm. The general studied her for a long moment. He had heard the name before. Ghost Lead was not just a story. She had led impossible missions, saved entire convoys, eliminated high-value targets in hostile territory, and vanished without a trace. The mere mention of the name sent shivers through even the most seasoned Special Forces veterans. And now somehow she was here in this dusty, chaotic base, cleaning rifles, seemingly ordinary but far from it. The soldiers who had mocked her yesterday avoided her gaze, uneasy. Some whispered in corners, speculating what it would be like if she actually had to fight. Would she be kind? Would she protect them? Or would they be the first to regret underestimating her? Corporal approached a small group of privates, lowering his voice. "Don't look now, but every time she moves it's like she knows exactly what we're thinking. Watch her, it's creepy. And her rifle technique, it's not just skill, it's, I don't even know, SEAL level, maybe higher." The private nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't want to be on her bad side," he admitted. I think we've underestimated her badly." Meanwhile, she continued, moving to a new rifle, checking its magazine, tightening screws, inspecting the scope. Her focus was absolute. She was not just performing a task, she was preparing, in ways no one could yet comprehend. The rumor reached the dining hall that afternoon. Soldiers leaned across tables, exchanging stories of Ghost Lead's legendary exploits, embellishing them with every retelling. Some claimed she had single-handedly eliminated a terrorist convoy. Others said she had infiltrated hostile territory and returned without leaving a trace. "Do you think she's actually capable of all that?" a private asked, eyes wide with fear and admiration. "Don't ask me," replied another. "I'd rather not find out the hard way, but if it's true, we're lucky she's on our side for now." By evening, the atmosphere at the base had shifted. The laughter that had once greeted her was gone. Soldiers moved quietly, avoiding unnecessary eye contact. Even those who were usually bold or disrespectful now felt a chill of uncertainty in her presence. It was as if the very air around her carried a warning: approach with caution, or be consumed by what you cannot understand. Late that night, the woman continued her work alone in the armory. The base was quiet, the only sounds the occasional clatter of rifles and the distant hum of generators. Peeked through the doorway, heart pounding. He wanted to see for himself, to understand the enigma. What he saw stopped him cold. She wasn't just cleaning rifles. She was practicing motions, running drills with empty magazines, simulating targets, adjusting her stance, her breathing, her aim. Every movement was precise, rehearsed, almost predatory. It was not the behavior of someone merely performing routine maintenance. It was the preparation of a soldier who anticipated danger at every turn. He whispered to himself, "She really is Ghost Lead." The name felt heavier in the dim light of the armory, like an unspoken threat, a legend brought to life. He wondered what it would be like to fight alongside her, and what it would be like if he ever faced her as an enemy. Either scenario filled him with awe and fear in equal measure. Back in the barracks, soldiers discussed her in hushed tones. "You don't just stumble into SEAL Team 6, one remarked. "It's impossible. Nobody survives their training. And if she's Ghost Lead, we're not just lucky she's here, we're lucky she's alive." No one dared confront her directly. Even Lieutenant, usually confident, felt a chill when he passed the armory door. Something about her presence unsettled him, though she said nothing to provoke it. He realized that this was no ordinary soldier. This was a force of nature, disguised as an ordinary woman, waiting silently for the moment her skills would be required. The rumor spread beyond mere speculation. By the next morning, the entire base knew. The woman cleaning rifles was no ordinary recruit. She was Ghost Lead, a living legend who had walked through fire and death without leaving a trace, whose mere presence demanded respect. Yet she did not change. She remained calm, methodical, silent. She worked with the same intensity as the first day she arrived. But now she moved through the base knowing all eyes were on her, some fearful, some admiring, some doubtful. And she carried the weight of their perception lightly, as though it meant nothing. Because in her world, nothing mattered except readiness. Every rifle, every round, every motion was preparation. And the base, unaware of the storm brewing, would soon learn the price of underestimating a ghost. By the end of the day, the whispers had become a hum of anxious respect. Soldiers who once mocked her would not dare make the same mistake again. And somewhere in the shadow of the armory, she paused for a moment, looking toward the mountains beyond the base. A silent thought crossed her mind. Danger was near, and soon her skills would no longer be practice. The quiet presence that had once been ignored now radiated power, control, and a sense of inevitability. Ghost Lead was here, and the base, for the first time, understood it. The morning sun burned through the dust-laden windows of forward operating base Kestrel, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete courtyard. Soldiers shuffled into the firing range, their boots scraping against the hard ground, weapons slung casually over shoulders. Laughter echoed through the air as a group of privates noticed the woman again. The quiet, meticulous rifle cleaner, whose reputation had grown overnight into a whispered legend. "She's nothing," Private muttered, nudging a fellow soldier. "It's just rumors, we're the professionals here." Corporal smirked. "Yeah, professionals who've been training in this heat for years. Let's see what she's got. I dare her to show us her so-called skill." The challenge hung in the air. Her reputation as Ghost Lead had stirred curiosity, yes, but also resentment. Men who had once mocked her now wondered if she was truly capable of the feats whispered about. When she entered the range, her presence was calm, almost casual. She carried a sniper rifle with the ease of someone who had never known fear. Soldiers stepped aside instinctively, though none admitted it aloud. She set the rifle on the bench with precise hands, loaded the magazine, and adjusted her stance. Her gray eyes scanned the far targets, measuring distance, wind, and the subtle inconsistencies in the dusty air. "Ready?" asked, voice strained with barely concealed challenge. She nodded once. Silence fell over the range, broken only by the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in the walls. Her first shot rang out, splitting the center of the target with a sound that seemed almost surgical. The group froze. "Bullseye," she said softly. The second shot followed, then the third. Each round hit dead center, the echo bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat of inevitability. 8 shots, all perfectly placed, with a speed and precision that left even the seasoned soldiers dumbstruck. The men's laughter, once loud and mocking, died in their throats, swallowed hard. How is that possible?" he whispered. Clenched his jaw. "That's impossible, that's SEAL-level shooting or something else." From the doorway, General Mason watched, his expression unreadable. He had arrived quietly, intrigued by reports of the rumors and now witnessing the reality of them. Every instinct told him that this was no ordinary soldier. Her stance, her breathing, the measured cadence of her shots, it was beyond trained personnel. This was a master at work. Lieutenant stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady despite the tension, your skills, this isn't just marksmanship. What unit are you with?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she replaced the magazine, checked the chamber, and lowered the rifle. Calmly, she looked at him, and for a brief moment the room felt unnervingly still, as if time itself had paused. "I'm here to observe," she said finally, her tone even unflinching, "and to ensure readiness." The general narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "Observation," he repeated. "From whom?" Her gaze didn't waver, from those who might underestimate this base. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers of ghost lead flitted through their minds, the myth that had become real before their eyes. They now saw not a quiet woman, but a predator in human form, a tactical genius whose mere presence demanded respect. Muttered under his breath, "I don't think any of us realized she's actually dangerous." Dangerous. The word lingered in the air. No one said it aloud to her, none dared, but the truth was undeniable. She moved with lethal precision, measured steps, and the quiet authority of someone who had survived countless missions where failure meant death. The general gestured toward the targets. "Demonstrate again," he said quietly, not to challenge her, but to understand what they were dealing with. She another 8 rounds, each hitting precisely where she intended. The soldiers watched, wide-eyed, some trembling, some frozen in awe. One of them, a sergeant with years in infantry, muttered, She's not just good, she's unreal." The general's mind raced. Ghost Lead, a legend of SEAL Team 6, could not appear in the public eye. Her presence here, off-record, suggested something more was coming, something the base might not be prepared for. She lowered her rifle and began cleaning the next weapon on the bench. Calm, unperturbed, untouched by the awe she had inspired. The soldiers, however, could not contain their curiosity. "Wait," said hesitantly. "Your dog tag SEAL Team 6 Ghost Lead, that's you." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. The name carried weight, terror, and awe, a legend that had crossed oceans, fought impossible missions, and returned alone. Her gaze met his for a brief second. "I am who I am," she said softly, "and if necessary I will do what needs to be done." The general's heart raced. He understood immediately. This woman was no myth. She was real, she was here, and she had arrived quietly, unnoticed, until the moment she revealed herself. The soldiers' reactions varied. Some were wide-eyed, trembling. Some bowed their heads slightly, instinctively deferring to her presence. A few, braver than most, tried to mask their fear. None succeeded. "What about the others?" asked, voice quiet. "Are there more like you?" She shook her head once, a subtle acknowledgement of her singularity. "I work alone when required. Others exist in shadows, but my path is separate." The general's gaze hardened. He had to make a decision. How to use her presence without exposing classified operations, without compromising the myth of Ghost Lead. How to ensure the base's survival when threats were already stirring beyond the perimeter. The soldiers, still reeling, began to understand a harsh truth. Mocking her was their first mistake. Underestimating her would be their second, potentially fatal mistake. That afternoon, the woman continued her meticulous work in the armory. Soldiers now watched from a respectful distance, keeping quiet. Every movement of hers was analyzed, every subtle twitch and gesture observed. They were learning slowly that Ghost Lead was not only lethal, but methodical, deliberate, and entirely in control. By evening, a nervous tension filled the base. Soldiers whispered about Ghost Lead's presence, her skills, her calmness in the face of danger. They wondered if the rumors were true, if she really could face any threat and survive unscathed. And deep down, each one feared they might find out sooner than they expected. The general walked past the armory door, stopping to glance at her once more. She met his gaze briefly, unflinching, and for a moment he felt the weight of history, of legend in her presence. Ghost Lead was not just a name. She was a force, silent, deadly, and impossible to ignore. And the base, once brimming with casual confidence, now understood a vital truth. The woman they had mocked was a predator in disguise, a storm cloaked in calm, and she would not be when the time came to act. That night the soldiers avoided the armory. Some whispered prayers, others simply watched from a distance. And somewhere in the shadows of the base, the woman cleaned rifles, precise and silent, her eyes fixed not on the men around her, but on the mountains beyond, anticipating, calculating, ready for the first sign of trouble. Because she was ghost lead. And the mockery had ended. The base was quiet that evening, bathed in the orange glow of a setting sun, shadows stretching long across the dusty concrete of forward operating base Kestrel. Soldiers moved cautiously, aware of the tension that had settled over the camp since the morning's display of skill. Whispers of ghost lead lingered in every corner, a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. Inside the armory she worked alone. Rifles lined the benches, each meticulously cleaned, oiled, and inspected. Her hands moved with the same precision as earlier in the day, but now there was a purpose to each motion that went beyond maintenance. She was preparing, anticipating, always watching, always calculating. General Mason entered silently, his boots echoing softly against the concrete floor. He paused at the threshold, observing the woman without speaking. She didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge his presence immediately, but her eyes flicked to him, sharp, gray, and unnervingly aware. "Lieutenant Hayes," he began, using the name he had received in preliminary reports. "I need to understand exactly who you are and why you are here. This base, these men, need to know what we're dealing with." She didn't move from her position at the bench. Her voice, calm and measured, filled the room. "I am here to observe, ensure readiness, and intervene only if necessary. The threats you are unaware of, they are approaching. I was sent to prevent casualties before you even see them." The general's brow furrowed. "Approaching? What are you talking about?" She stopped her work, placed a rifle carefully on the bench, and finally turned to face him fully. From beneath her uniform, she unclipped her dog tag and held it between her fingers. The general's eyes fell on the tag. "SEAL Team 6, Ghost Lead." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to freeze. The words struck him like a thunderclap. Ghost Lead. A myth, a legend whispered among the highest ranks, a name that was spoken only in extreme caution, for fear it might summon her wrath. The very idea of her being here in an operational capacity off the books was staggering. You're the Ghost Lead," the general finally managed, his voice low, almost reverent. The myth." She nodded slightly, calm as ever. "Yes, I have completed missions considered impossible, targets eliminated, convoys saved, operations executed without trace. I am here under direct orders to assess and protect this base." The general took a step closer, studying her closely. He had seen extraordinary soldiers before, but none like this. Every line of her body, every controlled breath, every movement radiated precision, control, and lethal intent. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a weapon. "I should have been informed," he said, anger and disbelief threading his words. "Why was no one aware of this assignment? Why was I not briefed?" Her gaze remained steady, unflinching. "The operation is classified. My presence here is off record to maintain operational integrity. You were never meant to know until the threat became imminent." The general's hands clenched. He had spent decades in the military, seen countless threats, but this, the reality of Ghost Lead standing in his armory, was unlike anything he had encountered. "You understand the consequences?" he asked, voice tense. "The men here, if they find out, chaos could break out. They don't know who or what they're dealing with." She set the dog tag down gently on the bench, her fingers brushing the metal with deliberate care. "They will learn when necessary, and by then they will understand. I do not operate for recognition. I operate for results. Lives saved, threats neutralized, missions completed." The general's mind raced. He thought back to the morning's demonstration, 8 perfect shots, flawless technique, unshakable composure. He recalled the whispered rumors, the uneasy glances of his soldiers, the growing tension that had spread through the base. All of it pointed to one undeniable truth. This woman, this myth made flesh, was the ultimate weapon. "And if the threat reaches the base before you act?" he asked, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Then it will be too late for them to mock me," she replied. Her words were simple, almost casual, but the weight behind them was crushing. She wasn't threatening, she was stating a fact. one born of experience and skill. The general exhaled slowly. His role shifted in that instant. He wasn't merely commanding a base anymore. He was now coordinating with a legend, a force operating above and beyond conventional understanding. The responsibility was immense. Any misstep could cost lives, and yet he had to trust her judgment implicitly. He glanced around the room. Soldiers lingered near the armory doorway, curious but hesitant. They had been observing, hearing fragments of the conversation, but none dared speak. The general knew it was time to address them, but he also knew the introduction of Ghost Lead to the entire base had to be handled carefully. Fear could be just as deadly as enemy fire. He began, his voice steady and commanding, "You have seen her skill. You have heard her name. What you do not understand yet is the scope of her experience. Lieutenant Hayes' Ghost Lead is here to ensure our survival. That is all you need to know." Some soldiers nodded, still wide-eyed. Others remained tense, unsure how to react. The general could see the shift in their posture, respect edging out doubt, caution replacing mockery. She returned to her work, cleaning another rifle, oiling the mechanisms, inspecting each component. The general watched her silently, understanding that this was only the beginning. The rumors of Ghost Lead were true, but what was coming next, the threat she had hinted at, would reveal her in ways no one on the base could yet imagine. He thought about the missions he had commanded, the lives he had saved, the men he had sent into combat. He realized, with a chill creeping down his spine, that none of those experiences had prepared him for this. Ghost Lead was beyond conventional strategy. She operated in a space where rules bent, limits broke, and only results mattered. The shadows in the armory seemed to deepen, as if acknowledging her presence. Outside, the wind stirred the desert dust, carrying the faint echoes of a base unaware of the storm approaching. Ghost Lead had arrived silently, her identity revealed to the general, her reputation confirmed. And now, the first moves in the coming battle would be hers to make. The general stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You said threats are approaching. How imminent?" She didn't look up. Her hands moved over the rifle with surgical precision. "Soon, tonight or tomorrow. I cannot predict exact timing, only that it will happen. When it does, everyone on this base will either follow my lead or face the consequences." The words were simple, but the weight was immense. Every soldier who had mocked her, every man who doubted her, every officer who questioned her presence, they would soon realize the truth. Ghost Lead was not a myth, not a rumor. She was real, and she was unstoppable. The general nodded slowly. He understood his role now. He would defer, follow, and trust. Lives depended on it. And as the woman methodically continued her work, he felt a strange mix of relief and fear. The base had a guardian, but that guardian was a force of nature, operating according to rules none of them fully understood. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Shadows stretched across the base, long and ominous. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, unseen eyes and hidden threats waited. Ghost Lead had revealed herself to the general, but the soldiers were still unaware of the coming storm. And when the storm arrived, they would see her in full force. For now she cleaned rifles, meticulous, calm, and deadly. And the legend of Ghost Lead, finally revealed, had begun its true work. The desert night fell quickly over forward operating base Kestrel, swallowing the perimeter in shadows. A low wind stirred the sand, carrying with it the eerie stillness that precedes danger. Inside the base, soldiers moved cautiously, performing their nightly routines. But unease lingered in the air, subtle yet pervasive, as if the earth itself whispered that something was coming. Ghost Lead Lieutenant Hayes stood inside the armory, rifles meticulously cleaned and lined on the benches. Her eyes scanned the horizon, unblinking, calm. She could sense it, the approach of a threat, silent but deadly, just beyond the perimeter. Her presence in the armory wasn't for show, it was preparation. Every motion she had performed earlier had been a prelude to this moment. The first indication came as a distant thump, muffled yet distinct, was the first to notice. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice tight. Laughed nervously. "Probably just the wind, Private. Don't start panicking over nothing." But Ghost Lead didn't need to hear. She had already moved to the observation post overlooking the perimeter, scanning with trained eyes. Figures emerged, creeping through the shadows, moving with military precision but with deadly intent. Hostiles had found the base. Communications were dead, someone had jammed them. The usual alarms were eerily silent. She spoke quietly, a command for those nearest her. "Positions. Cover the eastern wall. Move quietly. Do not engage unless I give the order." Soldiers froze. Confusion rippled through them. Who said that?" one asked. "Me," she replied calmly, her voice carrying authority. "Follow instructions. Lives depend on it." Panic began to rise, but her calm presence acted like a magnet, drawing them into order. Even those who had mocked her earlier instinctively obeyed, and exchanged wide-eyed glances. "She's commanding like a general," muttered under his breath. Ghost Lead moved like a shadow, fluid and precise. She positioned herself along a vantage point that allowed her to observe multiple enemy movements simultaneously. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Every soldier within sight followed her guidance, finding themselves operating more efficiently than ever before. The first shots rang out, distant but deadly. Enemy combatants breached the perimeter, moving quickly toward the base. Soldiers fired, but without coordination, they risked exposure. Ghost Lead assessed the situation in seconds. She mapped the battlefield mentally, predicting paths, angles, and the most dangerous threats. "Suppress the left flank," she barked sharply. "Cover the gate, focus fire on the shadows by the supply depot." Orders, precise and unambiguous, turned chaos into controlled defense. Soldiers who had moments ago been terrified were now moving with purpose. The initial advantage shifted. Where confusion had reigned, discipline now emerged, orchestrated by a single, unyielding presence. Ghost Lead's rifle spat fire into the darkness. Each shot found its mark, eliminating threats before they could respond. Her movements were silent, efficient, lethal. Soldiers whispered to each other in disbelief, eyes following her as she traversed the battlefield like a phantom, appearing where danger threatened, vanishing before it could strike. The general arrived at the armory doorway, his expression grim. He watched as the woman who had once quietly cleaned rifles became the linchpin of their defense. Soldiers who had doubted her skill now deferred entirely to her judgment. He realized in that instant that the base's survival rested on her shoulders. One group of hostiles attempted to breach a supply building. Ghost Lead moved silently, guiding, and two others to intercept. "Flank right," she instructed, voice calm but firm. "Stay low, cover each other." The group obeyed, moving with surprising efficiency. Ghost Lead provided cover fire, taking out two intruders before they could react. In moments, the threat was neutralized. From a distance, the general noted how the soldiers' confidence had shifted. Fear had transformed into controlled aggression under her guidance. Every command she issued was precise, every action calculated. Her experience was evident. She was not improvising, she was orchestrating. Meanwhile, the assault intensified. Explosions echoed across the base, sending plumes of sand and smoke into the night sky. Soldiers fired in unison, but their movements were guided entirely by her. Ghost Lead moved through the chaos like a shadow, eliminating threats silently and efficiently. At one point, a group of attackers attempted to breach the barracks. Ghost Lead positioned herself strategically, taking cover behind a supply crate. She fired twice, neutralizing the immediate threat, then instructed two soldiers to secure the remaining hostiles. The men obeyed, their confidence bolstered by her presence. Wide-eyed and pale, whispered to, "She's unstoppable. I can't believe what I'm seeing." Nodded, equally shaken. This isn't human, she's Ghost Lead." The general, observing from a safe vantage point, felt a mixture of awe and relief. The soldiers had survived the initial breach thanks entirely to her leadership and combat skill. She was more than a soldier. She was a force multiplier, a singular presence capable of turning chaos into order. As the night wore on, Ghost Lead remained calm and methodical. She moved through the base, eliminating threats, coordinating defensive positions, and ensuring no soldier exposed themselves unnecessarily. Each step, each shot, each command was deliberate, precise, and deadly. By the time reinforcements arrived, alerted by remote signals she had secretly restored, the assault had been neutralized. Enemy forces retreated, leaving behind the bodies of those who had underestimated the base's quiet protector. Ghost Lead finally returned to the armory where the general was waiting. He met her gaze, eyes wide with realization. You saved everyone," he said quietly. She placed the rifle back on the bench, breathing steady, unshaken. "I did what was necessary. The base is secure. Threats will return, but for now, order is restored." And the other soldiers approached cautiously, awe and fear etched on their faces. We owe you our lives," said, voice trembling. She gave no grand speech, no reassurance. Instead, she simply nodded, her gaze moving to the horizon. "I am here to ensure survival, that is all." The general stepped closer, studying her. You are more than anyone could have imagined. Ghost Lead is real, and we are fortunate you are here." Her eyes flicked toward the perimeter, scanning the darkness. Luck has little to do with it. Preparation, awareness, and discipline dictate survival. Those who fail to understand that will not survive next time. The soldiers who had mocked her, doubted her, or feared her now understood a vital truth. She was no myth. She was Ghost Lead, precise, deadly, and unstoppable. And the night had proven it. Outside, the desert wind howled through the empty dunes, carrying away the echoes of the assault. Ghost Lead remained vigilant, silent, and watchful. She had led them through their first trial, and the legend of her presence, once doubted, now undeniable, had in every mind at forward operating base Kestrel. The base had survived, lives had been saved, and a storm barely begun had revealed its first movement. The night belonged to Ghost Lead. The desert night had deepened over forward operating base Kestrel, swallowing the sand in near-complete darkness. Smoke from the previous assault still lingered in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the faint metallic scent of blood. Soldiers moved cautiously, their nerves frayed but their confidence slightly bolstered by Ghost Lead's decisive actions. Yet the tension remained palpable. The threat had not vanished, only retreated temporarily. Hayes, Ghost Lead, emerged from the armory with a calm purpose. Every rifle had been checked, every magazine loaded, and every potential threat assessed. Unlike the soldiers around her, she thrived in the chaos of the night. Her movements were deliberate, silent, precise, a predator in human form, moving where danger hid and striking before it could recognize her presence. The first group of intruders attempted to regroup near the western perimeter, hopping to exploit the temporary distraction. Ghost Lead already knew their position, anticipating their approach from subtle disturbances in the sand and faint echoes of movement. Without a sound, she positioned herself on a slight rise, hidden by the shadow of a nearby building. Her rifle's scope tracked the movement of each enemy with impeccable accuracy. With the first shot, a shadow dropped silently. A second shot, a third, each strike eliminating threats before they could react. Soldiers in the vicinity watched in awe, their fear mixing with astonishment. "She's everywhere," whispered, voice trembling. "It's like she's inside their heads before they even move." Corporal adjusted his stance, following Ghost Lead's silent cues. "I've seen trained snipers, but nothing like this. She's not just killing, she's controlling the battlefield." The general observed from the command post, binoculars focused on her movements. Every action was calculated, every placement strategic. Ghost Lead did not merely respond to danger, she anticipated it, molded it, and dictated its outcome. Each shot, each repositioning, each command flowed together in a seamless orchestration. A group of enemy combatants attempted to flank from the northern ridge. Ghost Lead didn't hesitate. She moved silently along the shadowed walls, guiding and two others to intercept. "Cover the ridge," she commanded, her voice a low whisper. "Keep low, don't expose yourselves." Her team obeyed instinctively, following her lead with unspoken trust. She moved among them like a ghost, appearing at critical points to provide cover fire, eliminating the most immediate threats while remaining untouchable herself. Every movement was surgical, every decision decisive. The soldiers who had mocked her just days before were now entirely reliant on her instincts. Each one felt the stark contrast between their usual training and the effortless command she displayed. Ghost Lead's presence demanded respect, and obedience was no longer a choice. It was survival. Beyond the perimeter, enemy reinforcements tried to coordinate a larger assault. Ghost Lead's keen observation caught subtle discrepancies in their movements: a poorly positioned guard, the faint reflection of a scope in the moonlight, the rhythmic shifting of sand indicating troop movement. She relayed instructions quietly, efficiently, and the soldiers responded, neutralizing threats before they could escalate. At one point, an enemy team breached the southern wall, forcing a brief firefight near the supply depot. Ghost Lead appeared from the shadows like a phantom. With two precise shots, she eliminated the lead combatants. Then, moving closer, she guided two soldiers to flank the remaining threats, ensuring no opportunity for counterattack. Within minutes, the depot was secure, and the attackers neutralized. And exchanged wide-eyed glances. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered. "She's not human, she's Ghost Lead." Nodded, "We're alive because of her, every single one of us." The general, still observing, made a silent note to report the actions. But he also knew that the full story could not be shared publicly. Not the precision, not the stealth, not the sheer lethality of Ghost Lead. The legend was real, and those who had underestimated it would never forget. The battle continued through the night. Ghost Lead moved fluidly between cover, checking the perimeter, eliminating threats before they could regroup, and ensuring her team maintained cohesion. Her eyes, unblinking and calculating, caught the smallest irregularities: the glint of a scope, the shadow of a crouched figure, the faintest sound of movement in the distance. She paused briefly atop a small ridge, scanning the desert horizon. The enemy had underestimated the base, and the chaos of their disorganization played directly into her hands. With a single glance, she assessed multiple potential ambush points, signaling her soldiers silently through gestures. Each move she made synchronized perfectly with their reactions. Inside the base, soldiers whispered to one another, watching her from behind barricades. Fear had been replaced by awe. Every command she gave, every shot fired, every shadow eliminated confirmed that she was more than legend. She was the ultimate protector, a living weapon orchestrating survival with unmatched precision. At the command post, the general realized the strategic brilliance behind her actions. Ghost Lead was not just reactive, she was predictive. She controlled the flow of combat, making every soldier's action more effective. The base's survival, previously uncertain, was now almost guaranteed under her guidance. Hours passed, the desert wind carrying the faint sounds of retreating enemy forces. Ghost Lead continued her patrols silently, checking for remaining threats, ensuring no ambushes had been left in the shadows. Soldiers moved behind her, keeping pace, following her lead instinctively. By dawn, the assault had been fully neutralized. The base was intact, casualties minimal, a direct result of her meticulous planning, anticipation, and flawless execution. Soldiers who had mocked her in the past now regarded her with reverence, understanding that their lives had been saved by a woman whose skills transcended ordinary comprehension. Ghost Lead returned to the armory where the general awaited. He regarded her silently, a mixture of relief and awe in his eyes. You've done the impossible," he said quietly. She set her rifle down, steady, calm as always. "This is preparation," she replied. "Survival is dictated by awareness, discipline, and timing. The threats are not gone, they've only retreated. This base remains under constant observation." Approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, you're incredible. How did you do all that?" Her eyes flicked to him, calm and unwavering. "I anticipate, I observe, I act decisively. Fear is wasted energy. Preparation and execution dictate outcomes." The soldiers nodded, understanding at last why she had earned the name Ghost Lead. Her actions were beyond mere skill. They were the culmination of experience, instinct, and sheer lethal precision. The general, still processing the events, realized the true gravity of her presence. The base had survived a coordinated assault, lives had been saved, and the soldiers' confidence had been restored, all because of her. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. Ghost Lead's methods and insight meant that the base's security had reached an unprecedented level. As the sun rose over the horizon, illuminating the dunes in pale gold, the desert seemed peaceful again. But beneath the quiet surface, danger lingered. Ghost Lead remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, ensuring that no threat went unnoticed. She had moved like a shadow, struck with deadly precision, and controlled the battlefield in ways no one could fully comprehend. The legend was real. The soldiers would remember this night forever. The base had survived, lives had been preserved, and Ghost Lead had moved silently, like a phantom among them, ensuring that order prevailed. And yet somewhere in the shifting sands beyond the base, other threats were gathering. Ghost Lead would be ready. For she was the shadow of justice, the unseen protector, and the unstoppable force guarding forward operating Base Kestrel. The desert morning cast a muted glow over forward operating Base Kestrel, illuminating the sand and smoke-stained structures from the night's battle. The chaos of combat had passed, but the tension remained. Soldiers moved cautiously, checking for lingering threats, repairing damage, and tending to the minor injuries sustained during the surprise assault. The base was alive with activity, yet beneath the motions of duty lay a profound respect and an unspoken awe. Ghost Lead Lieutenant Hayes remained at the center of this quiet storm, surveying the aftermath with unshakable calm. She moved through the base methodically, ensuring every defensive position was reinforced, every perimeter point secured, and every soldier accounted for. She had commanded the battle, and now she ensured its order persisted. And still pale and wide-eyed from the previous night, followed her cautiously, their minds still reeling. "I still can't believe what I saw," whispered, barely audible over the murmur of the base. She moved like a ghost. We were just shadows in her path." Nodded, staring at the clean, methodical lines of rifles she was inspecting. It wasn't just skill, it was instinct, strategy. She predicted everything before it happened. I've never seen anything like it. Soldiers who had initially mocked her avoided direct eye contact, yet their glances were filled with recognition, the silent acknowledgement of her authority and lethal efficiency. Fear had shifted into reverence, and mockery had been replaced with a quiet obedience born of survival. General Mason moved to the armory, where she was carefully checking the rifles one last time. His face bore the weight of sleepless vigilance, yet his eyes reflected a mixture of relief and amazement. He had witnessed firsthand what the base had faced, and he understood now why Ghost Lead's reputation was not just legend, it was reality. "You saved lives last night," he said quietly, approaching her. "The entire base. I don't know how to thank you." She didn't pause her work, maintaining the calm precision that had become her signature. Lives were preserved because the men followed orders, because they moved with awareness and discipline. My presence is only effective if others respond correctly. The general studied her, realizing that her humility, or perhaps her focus, was part of her effectiveness. She did not seek praise, nor did she command for recognition. She commanded because it was necessary. Every action, every shot, every decision had been precise and deliberate. Outside, the soldiers had gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Their voices carried awe and disbelief, recounting the moments they had witnessed. Approached a small group, gesturing toward where Ghost Lead had moved during the attack. "Did you see how she predicted their moves?" he asked. It was like she was reading their minds. The soldiers nodded, shivering at the memory. "I've trained for years," one said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like that. She's untouchable, a legend for real." Even the seasoned sergeants found themselves humbled. One remarked, "We've faced countless threats, but she changed everything. The way she moved, the way she coordinated, it was like watching a master at work. She's Ghost Lead, and she's real." Ghost Lead continued her inspection, moving through the base with deliberate care. Every soldier she passed instinctively straightened their posture, understanding without words that her presence was authority. Even those who had feared her now deferred to her judgment, aware that their lives had depended entirely on her precision and foresight. Lieutenant approached cautiously, his face a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Ma'am," he said, "the men, they need to understand what happened. They need to know why we survived." She glanced at him, her expression calm but piercing. "They already know in part. They know survival depends on discipline, awareness, and action. That is all they need to remember. Legends are not taught, they are witnessed." Nodded, understanding her point. The soldiers' awe was natural. It was impossible to explain Ghost Lead's skill, precision, and presence in words. They had witnessed her move like a shadow, eliminate threats with surgical accuracy, and orchestrate the defense of an entire base without hesitation. No story could capture the reality of it. As the morning progressed, reports of the enemy retreat came in. Reinforcements had arrived from nearby units, and the desert surrounding the base was once again quiet. The attack had ended, but the soldiers remained vigilant, their confidence now tempered by respect for the woman who had saved them. Ghost Lead gathered her team for a brief debrief. Her instructions were concise, clear, and efficient. She highlighted weak points, recommended adjustments, and ensured the base was prepared for any future threats. Every word carried weight, every directive was followed without question. She had earned absolute trust, not through intimidation, but through action. Approached her quietly, almost hesitantly. "Ma'am, the soldiers, they won't forget this night. They'll respect you forever." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Respect is earned, not given, and survival is not permanent. Complacency is the greatest enemy, remember that." The general observed the interaction silently, recognizing the profound truth in her words. Ghost Lead's effectiveness wasn't just her skill, it was her philosophy. Preparation, awareness, discipline, and decisive action were her guiding principles, and they had ensured the survival of an entire base. By midday, the base had returned to a semblance of normalcy. Repairs were, soldiers were recovering, and communications were gradually restored. Yet the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Mockery and doubt had been replaced with awe, fear had been tempered by respect, and the legend of Ghost Lead had become undeniable reality. Even in quiet moments, her presence remained commanding. Soldiers instinctively moved with purpose, aware that she observed, that she guided, and that she was always ready. Found himself watching her, realizing that the woman who had quietly cleaned rifles days ago had become the anchor of the entire base. General Mason approached her once more. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, his tone serious, "I've seen legends before, but never like this. You've changed the way this base operates and the way every soldier thinks about survival." She returned his gaze evenly. "Then ensure they remain vigilant. Remember, the threat never truly disappears. Survival is earned again and again." The soldiers watched silently as she moved through the armory one last time, checking weapons, assessing supplies, and ensuring the base was ready. Each motion was deliberate, precise, and calm, the very essence of control. And then, as quietly as she had dominated the battlefield, she prepared to leave. Ghost Lead had completed her mission at Kestrel. Her presence no longer needed now that the threat had been neutralized. She would disappear into the shadows, as she always did, leaving behind awe, respect, and a legend in the minds of every soldier who had witnessed her. Whispered to as they watched her, rifles in hand, preparing to move out. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Shook his head slowly. "I don't know, and if we do, I don't think any of us will ever forget it." Ghost Lead paused at the armory doorway, her gray eyes sweeping across the base one last time. She offered no farewell, no words of comfort. Her work was never about recognition, only results. Then, silently, she slipped away into the desert shadows, leaving the base intact, the soldiers alive and her legend Ghost Lead etched permanently in their minds. The general stood silently, watching her disappear. He understood the truth now. The woman who had saved them all was not a soldier in the conventional sense. She was a force, a phantom, a legend who moved unseen, struck with precision, and vanished without fanfare. She had taught the base a lesson they would never forget. Underestimating Ghost Lead was fatal, respecting her was essential, and witnessing her was a privilege. Forward operating base Kestrel had survived, and its soldiers had learned the value of vigilance, preparation, and decisive action. And somewhere beyond the reach of their eyes, Ghost Lead had moved on, ready for the next threat, the next challenge, the next mission. For she was the shadow that protected, the phantom that struck, and the unstoppable force that would be remembered forever. The desert stretched endlessly under the mid-morning sun, golden sands glinting and rolling toward the horizon. Forward operating base Kestrel, once chaotic and vulnerable, now stood resilient, but unbroken from the night's battle. The men moved through the base with a quiet energy, repairing damage, tending to minor injuries, and restoring the order that Ghost Lead had so decisively ensured. Yet a profound change lingered in the air, intangible but undeniable. The legend of the woman who had saved them all had been etched into every mind. Hayes, Ghost Lead, had vanished into the shadows at dawn, leaving no trace behind, as she always did. Her departure was as quiet as her arrival, yet the echoes of her actions reverberated across the base. Soldiers whispered in awe, replaying every detail they had witnessed. The flawless precision of her shots, the way she moved like a phantom among them, and the commanding authority she had wielded without uttering unnecessary words. Found himself staring at the ridge she had disappeared toward, the desert winds carrying her scent away with every passing gust. She's more than a soldier," he murmured to, still shaken. "She's a force of nature." Nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "We saw the legend, man, and now we know the truth. Ghost Lead isn't just a story, she's real and she's unstoppable." Around the base, soldiers shared stories of her actions, each retelling more reverent than the last. They described how she had predicted enemy movements, how she had coordinated their defensive positions with near telepathic precision, and how she had eliminated threats silently, efficiently, and without hesitation. The legend had grown even larger in their minds. No exaggeration could match the reality they had witnessed. The general walked among his troops, observing the quiet murmurs and the way the men's eyes still darted to the horizon. He had spent decades in the military, seen countless acts of bravery and skill, but nothing compared to what he had witnessed last night. Ghost Lead was not merely skilled, she was transcendent. She embodied experience, instinct, and lethal precision, and she had used it to save an entire base. He paused beside Lieutenant. "Do you understand what just happened?" he asked quietly. "This wasn't just survival. This was in warfare, and we were lucky enough to witness it." Nodded slowly. "I do, sir, and the men will remember it. They'll carry it with them, how she acted, how she moved, how she commanded everything. They've been changed by it. The general's gaze drifted to the ridge where Ghost Lead had disappeared. He realized with a mixture of relief and awe that she would not stay. She never did. Her presence was needed elsewhere, her skills required in places the world would never know, in missions that would never be reported. And yet, the impact she had left behind would endure. Elsewhere on the base approached the general hesitantly. "Sir, what do we do now? She's gone, but everything she taught us, the way she moves, the way she thinks, how do we carry that forward?" The general looked thoughtful. "We survive. We remain vigilant. We respect what we witnessed. And we train harder than ever, knowing that Ghost Lead's standard is what we should aspire to. She set the bar impossibly high, but it's a standard worth reaching." Soldiers went about their duties with a renewed sense of purpose, each remembering Ghost Lead's instructions: discipline, awareness, anticipation, and decisive action. They had survived the assault not by luck, not by skill alone, but by following the silent guidance of a legend. And now, that lesson would shape every soldier who had been present. Hours passed and the base returned to a fragile normalcy. Yet even in moments of calm, her presence was felt. Empty hallways, shadows along the walls, and the subtle order in which everything now moved were reminders of her invisible hand. Ghost Lead had been there, and she had left her mark permanently. The general gathered the officers for a final briefing. "Last night," he began, voice steady, "we witnessed what few ever will. A soldier who is not only highly skilled but beyond ordinary comprehension, Ghost Lead. She acted decisively, preserved lives, and ensured the survival of this base. Her methods were flawless and her presence demanded respect. Learn from this. Teach what you can. And never forget the lesson she imparted without even trying." Lieutenant added quietly, "She also showed us humility in action. She didn't seek recognition, didn't demand praise. She did what had to be done. That's as important as her skill." The officers nodded, understanding the weight of his words. It was a lesson in both leadership and lethal precision, a rare combination that would resonate for years to come. Meanwhile, and stood at the edge of the base, gazing toward the distant desert where Ghost Lead had disappeared. "Do you think she'll come back?" asked, voice low. Shook his head. "She never stays, but we'll carry her lessons with us. Every soldier who was here last night has been changed. We've seen what's possible and we'll remember it every time we train, every time we patrol, every time we face danger." Far beyond the base, Hayes moved silently across the desert, her gray eyes scanning the horizon for the next threat. Each step was calculated, each movement precise. She had completed her mission at Kestrel, but the world was vast and danger never rested. Her presence would be required elsewhere, in places where lives hung in the balance, and precision was the difference between survival and annihilation. Ghost Lead did not consider herself a hero. Recognition, fame, or gratitude was irrelevant. She operated in shadows, striking with surgical precision and vanishing without notice. And yet, her impact endured wherever she went. The soldiers at Kestrel would remember her not only for her skill, but for her discipline, foresight, and the silent authority she commanded. By midday, the base had regained its rhythm. Soldiers moved with purpose, weapons checked, perimeters reinforced, and morale cautiously restored. Yet every shadow, every echo in the wind reminded them of the phantom who had saved them. Ghost Lead's legacy was no longer a whisper or rumor. It was real, tangible, and enduring. The general watched his troops, a sense of profound gratitude filling him. "She's gone," he said quietly, "but her presence remains. The men have witnessed the impossible and now they carry it forward. That is her true legacy." Watching the distant desert whispered, "We'll tell the story someday. Not everything, not her identity, but the legend. Ghost Lead, she'll live forever in our memory." Placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll survive because of her, and every soldier here will honor that, not with stories but with action. Discipline, awareness, precision. That's what she taught us." The desert wind swirled, carrying the scent of sand and gunpowder, mingling with the memory of a night that had changed everything. Ghost Lead had moved through Kestrel like a shadow, decisive, lethal, and unseen. And as she disappeared into the horizon, one truth was undeniable. She would always be a ghost, a legend, and an unstoppable force. Forward Operating Base Kestrel would never forget. Soldiers would speak in hushed tones about the phantom who had saved them, teaching the value of vigilance and the consequences of underestimating the unseen. Her presence, though fleeting, had left a permanent imprint. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in a world unaware of her movements, Ghost Lead prepared for the next mission. The legend continued, untouchable, unstoppable, and eternal. The sun climbed higher, bathing the desert in brilliant light, and the base thrived, strengthened by the lessons of the night. The story of Ghost Lead, Lieutenant Hayes, was complete here, for now, but her legacy would echo forever, whispered among soldiers who knew that true legends never fade.